Hello, everyone. My voice finds you tonight to talk about one of the most important things we can talk about: imagination. Two questions arose to me. Two questions that one had a poetic, portal to it. The other, a way more linear approach. The first question: is imagination paint on the empty canvas of space? When my mind fathomed this sentence, I was like, yo, man, I'm a poet. This is like, kind of like the frontiers of modern poetry, I guess. For this episode, the viewers will have the privilege of walking with me through how my mind has engaged this idea. This episode will also have a notepad, so it's important for people to look at the screen. And the viewers may wonder, whose coughs are these? And, I don't know. It's like this, I think it's my neighbors. But anyways, I apologize in advance. This is my capability in this moment. And so I've decided to hold a microphone. Questions are welcomed in the comment section. Challenges are welcomed in the comment section, and pretty much anything's welcomed in the comment section. I've done something that in order for people to comment in the comment section, they have to subscribe to the channel. So if somebody wants to say hateful things, I'll be like, yo, at least there was an illusion of a subscriber. Sometimes I think if I go to this, the ancient yogis, and I'm like, yo, man, why is my YouTube channel at 11K? And then the yogis would be like, buddy, you're in samsara, you're taking your podcast too seriously. But jokes aside, let's dive into the talk. Let's see what one human being can extract from the void tonight. So, there we go. People should be able to see a screen. And I forgot to put on the music, so hold on, guys. There we go. Let's begin. It's been 5 minutes, but let's begin. So the first question: is imagination paint on the empty canvas of space? Now, because this episode has two questions, I'm going to try to draw parallels in between and then technically answer one bigger question. So in the subtitle I've written, could imagination? The subtitle's honestly worthy of being a title of its own, but anyways, could imagination be our life in another dimension? guys. I'm about to, I think these are tears on my face, tears of bliss. So, all of these, I pretty much, as one human being on this planet, if I was to say, if I was to try to teach, let's say somebody was like, okay, you have 100 years to teach a species how to, comprehend things in a certain way, or how to understand. I would say all of understanding is pretty much where is the starting point, and in some sense, where is the starting point. So the concept and the context is very crucial in anything a person wants to understand. Pretty much what I feel knowledge is that our eyes perceive in some sense information, and then our mind through memory and also imagination has the role or there's a sort of taxonomy where there's a sort of, it's as if our mind classifies the sensory perception that is received into pretty much reality. So what's important in both of these, let's say A, B, and so I shouldn't say equal, but the idea is we're looking for the concepts and the contexts of these two questions, and really, if we want to start from existence, I would in some sense say that the concept would be self and the context would be the world. And so, before I go to a new page, is imagination paint on the empty canvas of space. So space is the context, and imagination, or being paint, is the concept, okay? And so could imagination be our life in another dimension? The another dimension is the context. And then again, imagination is the concept. Our life. So, I guess the starting point would be we have, a human being. A human being, we have concept, we have context. The context is the world. The concept is the self. Now, imagination, I would say, is here. We have to try to see the relationship between this, right? If, let's say, we start from a materialist, this is how you should truly write materialist. We have materialist and immaterialist. The materialist is considering that the world came first, world first, and self second. The immaterialist is considering the self came first and the world came second. And why is this important? Because it's suggesting the causal position. And let's say the effectual position. So the idea is that it's the relationship of world with self
and then self with world. Now, technically, how would I say this? Let's say we have the self and we have the world. And I feel there's 4 possibilities, right? So either the self is imagined and the world is imagined. The self is imagined. The world is real. The self is real. And we can say the world is imagined. And we have that the self is real and the world is real. And you know what's funny between these 4 possibilities? What is interesting is that we are starting from, or you could say this is like modernity, 2022. This is 2022. If the self is in some sense, so if the self is real, the world is real, we're like, yay, you know, we're in reality. Now, if the self is real, the world is imagined, this would be similar to what I would say religion, where the idea comes that we're in the world of, we're the imagination of an inconceivable source to creation, right? So pretty much we're the imagination of God. It's another way of saying that we know we are real, but we don't know if the world is real, okay? So religion, and you could even say like spirituality, not spirituality, but let's say this is religion. The point is God. The point is that the context, you know, the world is a simulation pretty much. We are real, but the world is a simulation. So I'll put simulation here. Now, if the self is unreal, but the world is real, this is very interesting. This is when we are a hallucination. And when it's imagined, the self is imagined, the world is imagined. This is another way of saying nothing was never here. What a beautiful sentence. Nothing was never here. And I would say this is the 4th one, where the self is imagined, the world is also imagined. It's kind of strange. I'm trying to fathom how I could correlate it. At one angle, I could see that, okay, everything is like, that means the man is not real, and neither is God real, or neither the self is real, neither the world is real. I would say this would be like an empty question mark. So this would be empty mystery. Our species doesn't have the ability, I shouldn't say doesn't have the ability, but most human beings cannot allow themselves to be void, right? That's pretty much why, like, mystics are rare beings. Why? Because they can stop psychologically existing to their physiology through the recognition that it's their psychology which is giving their physiology context. So, let's look at these a bit closer. If the self is real, and the world is real, this is like truth equals everything. If the self is real, or let's say if the self is unreal, and the world is unreal, this is another way of saying truth equals nothing. And this is pretty much the anguish of, I would say, materialism, or the anguish of nihilism, which is this idea that there has never been a person here, that all our understanding of who we are is just the coincidental hallucination of a unique positioning of the periodic table. We are literally like how the periodic table gained a personality. If you were a Buddhist scientist, you'd probably think the periodic table is reincarnating all the time. The beautiful thing about the human mind is that it finds its presence in a world that has known variables and unknown variables. The unknown variables really give us something to do, because the known variable is in some sense the starting point, right? If somebody was to say what is the difference between a conscious life and an unconscious life, an unconscious life is like a life where the person doesn't know who is living it, right? But the conscious life is the person, the point of attention knows, right? Right now, I would say, like, the way I am conscious is like, okay, there's the existence of my body. This is providing a capability of reception and projection, reception and expression. And so it's as if like my body is like the wax of a candle, and my mind being active is like the flickering of the candle flame, right? And so it's like, how is the candle flame here? Because of the body. Is the candle flame the body? No. Let's say that when we have a self in a world, 4 types of worlds. So when we have a self in a world, 4 types of worlds of experience of existence become possible. Now, what is the role or significance of imagination in these four possible worlds, in these four, let's say, parallel possibilities of the world? So I'm saying, like, we're creatures in a just conscious in a world. We don't know what's going on, and so I would say so far in this episode I've theorized four parallel possibilities of what is going on here, right? So if the self, let's say in a world where the self is real and the world is real, imagination is real. That means if the concept and context are both real, whatever the concept does in the context, or however way the context moves the concept, are real. So the role of imagination is equivalent to existence. And let's say, in this first part of reality, you know, if the self is real, it's another way of saying imagination was here before reality. Or let me actually see. There's something more here, something I'm missing. I can just feel it. So first we got to look at what does reality mean, and what does imagination mean, of course, even though there's four possible ways of defining this. It's like pretty much I'm saying what is real and unreal in four different types of parallel universes. Imagine there's four types of Earth right now, four versions of the Earth, and I'm wondering about, okay, the role of reality and imagination. So far, I would say that the human emotions can change through these perspectives. It would be saying like how would I say it? I guess I gotta go use myself as an example. So, let me see. If my self is my individualism, which is my body, it's like if I consider we're here, I could do something. We have a physical world. Then a physical self appeared. So far, this would be real to real. So let's say evolution. This is from the real world going to real self. Now we have the physical self going to the non-physical self. This is pretty much the creature becoming a subject to itself. Where I would say technically it's like the conscious revolution. Or how would I say it? Physical self, for example, it's an object. Non-physical self, it's like how it was named and its thinking, it's its name and personality and the character and the subjective story. So this would be I guess from a real self to an unreal self. And then we have an unreal self going to an unreal world. So it's like this, pretty much what I'm saying is like the world was an object. Then there emerged the body of a creature. This creature didn't know it was separate from the world, but it was happening as some sort of activity. The creature somehow becomes conscious of itself, whether seeing its reflection in a pond or reflection in its eye, in ice, or like noticing its shadow, or in some sense noticing other creatures similar to it, or noticing its hands or something. Like the way the biological existence is that one of the most initial observances is like pretty much a first-person point of view of our body, right? So every person's born being an observer, or like from the first-person point of view. It's like a first-person video game, right? We're looking at it through the screen that is our eyes. Now, pretty much there's an ability to observe like your hands when you build something or create something, or when you move, right? It's like our eyes are not above our head, kind of like, let's say, a drone camera just being able to give us an aerial view, but on some level our attention starts through the body. It's like the eyes are the front view window. It's like the windshield of like this elemental biochemical vehicle we are, right? upon attaining consciousness, right? What is consciousness? It's like the world is happening as an existential event, and suddenly there's the capability of an experiential event to simultaneously run like a double-edged program, you know? It's as if there's one level of the world happening where we are a physical entity in a physical place, even though there's a lot of empty space everywhere. But like, really what we are is a physical, we're an object in an objective realm. But ever since evolution and just the, let's say, language acquisition, or pretty much how the creature managed to create a symbolic world and use that symbolic world to update itself in the real world. What imagination is the brain's prototype of the outer realms, the world, the inner version of the world, you know? And that inner version of the world is filtered through our memories. And what imagination is, they don't tell this to people, because it's I think a lot of people don't care about imagination, even though all of reality begins somewhere, you know? The world that begins behind your eyes, imagination is its source. The world that begins in front of your eyes, the imagination doesn't belong to you. So it's like, let's say the whole cosmic setting was just a space for minds to imagine. Imagine there was a universal mind. And this universal mind was bored of just staring at the void, and suddenly, you know, existence was imagined by them inconceivably. Now, the idea is that it's kind of like existence is like who imagined this, or it's like an imagination that's here for free. Like we don't have to imagine. Like I don't have to imagine this table being a physical table. It just is. It's kind of like the conscious waking state is accessing like the imagination of a mind that is not your own. Right, that's why like in a lot of traditional spiritualism, they had like Sufi tradition, they had this view that they were travelers, you know. There's this notable Sufi story worth mentioning, where there's this merchant who has this caravan of goods, and he's passing by and he goes to this village that barely anybody visits, right? And so he goes there, and you know, people of the village realize like some sort of, like, to them it would be like a divine event, because nobody would go to their village. But this merchant comes and everybody runs, in some sense, trying to, you know, pay for the goods or barter for the goods. And so the merchant's like, all right, people are in need, take what you need, you know. And so, like, of course there's an exchange of value, some sort of value exchange. And so there's this one guy who doesn't have enough to pay for something he needs, and the merchant sees the guy that needs it, and he's like, okay, just take it, you know. And in that moment, right, the person who sees that the merchant has done an act of kindness, he says, I don't have something physically to give you, but I could give you something non-physical. He doesn't say it like that, I'm saying it like that, but he pretty much says there's an enlightened Sufi dervish in the village, and he lives at the edge of the village, and the guy says, you know, thanks for giving me this, I'm going to, like, you know, go and visit this guy, go and see this, like, liberated guy. And in the Sufi tradition, those people who were enlightened, they were known as like the people who had the pearl, as if like the secret, or the ultimate secret of reality was a pearl inside an oyster, and those who had realized that they had the pearl, you know, or the unknown had revealed itself to them. So anyways, this guy says, you know, there's this wise man with the pearl, go see him. Right, and the merchant's like, why not? And he goes to this, you know, like, let's say the house that is like the least like a house, you know. and he knocks on the door, you know, and I wanted to say the door's like made from tree bark, like from Shrek, but like, but it's not like that bad, you know. But anyways, let's say, you know, the merchant knocks on the door, and the door opens, and there's this very, like, you know, there's this Sufi dervish, right? And the Sufi dervish, out of courtesy, says, well, welcome, you know, as if to the Sufi dervish, it's like, okay, this is like a spontaneous event of, you know, it's like, God, how are you moving today? You know, it's like that kind of attitude, right? And so the dervish welcomes the merchant sits down, the dervish has like a teapot, you know, and he's like, you know, getting the tea ready, and the merchant creates some sort of small talk. He looks at the dervish and he says, my friend, you know, it's like, where is your furniture? Right? And all that the Sufi dervish has in his house is like a mat, a lamp, and like the tea kettle, you know. Something like that. So the merchant says, you know, like, where's your furniture, you know? And suddenly, this supposedly enlightened Sufi dervish, suddenly, with a very intense tone, he looks at him and he says, where's your furniture, you know? And the merchant's kind of like, you know, pushed back by this a bit, you know. And he says, you know, his tone changes, and the merchant says, where's my furniture? I'm a traveler here. You know, I'm a traveler. I'm traveling between merchants. You know, I don't have furniture. And similarly, this is where the enlightened Sufi drops his intensity. And he says that, he smiles and he says, me too. I'm a traveler, but I'm a traveler in this world. And for the first time, this merchant suddenly sees the metaphor of his daily life having a sort of fractal representation, as if similar to how this merchant was going from town to town, right? He was a traveler where there was nothing to really have when you're traveling, right? So similarly, right, the Sufi brought forth this archetype that you're a traveler, your consciousness is traveling in the unconscious. And what imagination is the findings of this journey, you know. Imagination is like part of the road of how the conscious discovers or finds contentment with the unconscious. You know, we have people who are powerful, let's say like they're powerful physical entities, and there are some people who are powerful mental entities, and these are different in people, right? You could have somebody be like physically very weak, but they could have like the mind of a conqueror, or you could have somebody, you know, physically being very strong, but their mind is like of a, you know, of the undeserving, right? Because there is no lesser. The moment the mind can see it, it's pretty much what it is the mind is providing a spectrum of possible sub-images of context to place upon the moment, right? Our mind is the closest thing to, like, you know, divinity, right? We are the divinity in the room. Right? People don't say this, but really we are. It's like, why should there be anything moving in emptiness, right? And so that's where philosophically there's a sort of divine access point, you know. People think divinity has to be only through a religious context. It is not the case. Divinity was in the world prior to language defining it. People don't realize this. We started off as experiential beings. Children are not born with being a subject to themselves, right? It's not like, you know, the child is born already knowing its name and its, like, you know, its street address and all this. The child enters the world without ideological landscapes to overlay on reality. It's just like a pure first-person point of view, direct experience of an unknown world. But then, in order for the child to communicate, we require to be conditioned and rendered as an individual subject, right? That means it's like, imagine a child that doesn't know its name and the parents are calling it, right? They're like, I don't know, let's call the child Billy, and the parents are like, Billy, Billy, Billy. you know? And the child is like, who the hell is Billy? It's like, what is the sound I'm hearing? The child hasn't even discovered itself as a subject yet, right? There's something Jacques Lacan calls the mirror effect. When the child looks into the mirror and notices it's an object, right? It notices that, okay, that's my reflection. I'm a body in the space-time continuum, maneuvering, navigating, being piloted, right? But then there's the child discovering itself as a subject, right? And most children, this is something the educational system, I think, fails at teaching, but in the educational system starts off by saying, hey child, look outside of yourself at what has happened in the past. That's the educational system so far, right? It's as if for some reason we're trying to, absolutize the past to a present that has a changing future ahead of it. To be honest, the best educational system would be kind of like an effort towards the future, a mighty effort, right? It would be a purpose giver, but a grand collective purpose, right? The economical sector has failed to give a purpose to the human being that is so honorable that it snaps out of its ethnocentric conditioning into a sort of role as a universal entity. Right? It's as if I'm here on this planet being like, oh, nice. When we can all accept we're being human beings, that we're one species, maybe then, in the evolution of a species in the void, we begin to realize to be a universal event is our birthright. That means as much as I am here, being like, okay, this biological body and my name and personality is me being a human being, simultaneously I am being present in a universe that is happening. So I am, as all of us are, part of this universal event, and we are that corner of the cosmos that has noticed it. That's the magnificence, that's the miracle in the void. So there's something to do because there's something to see. The mind wanders because the space for it is there. So imagine you were acting like a human being on Earth when you have been a universal being from the beginning, right? Because here's the funny thing. Carl Jung separated it between the individual consciousness and the collective unconscious. Now, what does this imply, right? It's another way of saying, like, when it comes to knowledge, we are different. People don't know things in the same way, even though they agree on things, but everybody's eyes have, they're from their own private universal inner sector, inner private inner universal sector. What I'm trying to say is, in knowledge we are different, but when I wonder about, okay, could it be that what I don't know is equal to what everybody else also doesn't know? And I realize what I don't know, whether it's an individual realizing it doesn't know, or whether you're a collective being unknown, it's the same. That means it's hilarious that we're using knowledge to figure out what's going on, but the nature of it is unknown because it is multidimensional, and the multidimensionality, it's not like just a cut up cake, it's a changing multidimensionality, right? That means it's like we haven't reached the point to even fathom what could it be that this space is alive.
think it's just the body, because the body's like in the spotlight of consciousness, but the consciousness itself, isn't it remarkable? Wherever you are listening to me right now, just relax on your chair or wherever you are, and for a second just appreciate how everything started from nobody knowing anything. Everything started from an I don't know moment. It's like before the I was an I, like before the I thought was established as us, it was unknown, right? And the fear of the unknown has made us cower away in ideological systems that the only way they accept us is if we believe them, right? Belief and faith are two different things. This is my view, right? People who are believers and those people who have faith in truth are completely different people. Do you know? Because one is out of fear accepting, the other, right, is in some sense, how would I tell you? It's like their acceptance gets rid of their fear. The other one is how would I say it? It's like the believer, due to fear, is not itself. But those who have faith, and their faith comes from an inner contentment, that is completely different, right? One of the coolest feelings is to feel that there's a hollowness to our acceptance of phenomena in a changing world, right? It's this strange feeling where the person's like, what kind of program has my mind been running? Or in some sense, like this character that has been my subjective focus. It's like, why is it here at all? Right? To be a philosopher means to be capable to pull the rug from under your own feet, That's the power of philosophy and mysticism. What I'm trying to say is that the context is sculpting the concept. The context is an unknown world, an unknown, infinite, edgeless world, right? That means pretty much like, even if you were a religious person, the religious person might wonder, like, God, I understand that, like, you created the earth to test, like, the descendants of Adam and Eve, but why did you create all the other planets? Like, why is there a reason, right? Isn't that bizarre? Like, from the religious notion, there's this view that God created the world for man, but there's also a bunch of empty planets in our solar system. It's kind of like either we came late to the party, right, or they are still there, we can't see them. I have this feeling that the world is a multidimensional place, and simultaneously in another parallel universe, the similar algorithm being run on Earth for a species is also being run on any, you could say, planetary entity. So what it is that the sunlight is actually instructions. I believe this is some part of me deep down feels this is what's been going on, is that imagine on Earth we built an advanced civilization, and this advanced civilization reached a point that it became so advanced that the only thing left to do was to overpopulate the whole cosmic space with the greatest intelligence, which would be, in some sense, how would we spread life? Like, let's say we have become the masters of life. It's like, what would the masters of life do? They would wonder about how would we take the world to mastery,
right? The Buddha was, you could say, the person who was free from themselves in the world. The Bodhisattva is someone who's already free from themselves. Now they want, in some sense, the world. They want, excuse me. The Buddha is someone where the self is free from the world. The Bodhisattva is the being where the world wants to be free from the self. That means it's like pretty much the entity reincarnates not to be a human being, but to be a collective rhythm. I'm telling you, we are on some level like rhythmic entities, It's like if a song could be a cosmos, this would be it, Imagine in ancient mythologies where gods were walking in clouds, there was a god who was a violinist, okay? Let's call him, the god called Viola or something, or the Italian god called Violino. No, I'm joking. But I'm just saying, okay, that imagine there was a god, right, in a greater dimension, playing this violin song, playing this melody, and this melody was in some sense becoming a world for a lesser dimension. It's as if like matter is the shadow of the music of greater dimensions, Anyways, to bring this back to the talk, the journey of this traveling consciousness in the unconscious, it's as if the journey of a real world into a real self, the journey of a real self into an unreal self, and the journey of an unreal self into an unreal world. Right now, we are at the real self and the unreal self point. Right now, the greatest contribution to the species is just to get our species to recognize that it is not the content of its mind, it is the viewer. Right, that's the whole point of meditation, that when the person just sits and imagine somebody was like, went to this really enlightened guru and was like, oh my God, enlightened guru, tell me the one thing I should do to get enlightened, right? And imagine the enlightened guru was like, all right, watch your moment. That's it. And when you watch your moment, there will come a moment where you stop putting in any effort and the moment automatically moves. And when you trust that, the mind advances. So guys, a very interesting question has appeared in the chat section. Somebody says, how can one believe in God or even the idea of God? This is my view. You don't believe in God as if he is an idea. You believe in God as if, like, let's say a friend of yours wanted to, do a backflip and you believed in that friend. I believe that when they say you believe in God, it's like that's the idea, because God is an inconceivable origin to manifestation. That means anybody who attempts to believe the inconceivable, it doesn't make sense. You believe in God's will. I think that's the full sentence. Like that's the suggestion of the full sentence, which is another way of saying your idea of self, the ego. This is why in certain monotheistic religions there's this concept of surrendering the ego. I'm like someone looking at modern Western society and I'm like, okay, people don't want to surrender their ego, so let's at least advance it and see how far it can go, right? But in Eastern cultures, their whole idea is, it's like, why are their human rights limited? Because they're trying to preserve a sort of inner state. Their inner constitution is more important than their outer constitution, and so the politics of their outer realms doesn't evolve, so that it's as if it's a room. Religion is a room for your mind. It's a specific room where the ego, it's as if like you realize it's not you that's just moving, everything is God's will that's moving. So how the free will even moves is God's will. So a religious person is technically, God worshipping itself, or God realizing it is itself based on the tradition. To me, God is another way of saying you can't know it, because the idea of God is inconceivable, right? And it's as if, to me, the religious books, I do not doubt their mystery. I've had moments where I could tell you I was raised in a culture where sometimes ideas were treated more important than people, right? For example, there's a lot of children raised in religious cultures where before they can know who they are actually in an inner ecosystem of their environment, right? And the task of free will is not to, in some sense, be chaotic and destructive and have anarchy, but for every person to be like, okay, my attention is open, is present in a moment. Where is the initial value? To the engine of all my thoughts throughout the day. It's like, what is the original point, right? The whole idea of just, there being anything to talk about is pretty much we're all like, treasure revealers waiting to reveal treasure, right? And treasure's not just outside. That means someone comprehending something about the nature of their mind is more valuable than somebody like, memorizing what the past shouted, For me, here's the idea. Everything is animate due to there being an animate receiver of it. For me, the concept of God is a beautiful strategy for the human species to counter its meaningless and loneliness in existence. It's as if, like, imagine just from the perspective of like an orphan in a religious country, right? The orphan's like, there's no one except there's God, though, right? And what is God? God is another way of saying you're not alone. And this loneliness is another way of saying the world is not alone, right? It's like the artist is still looking at its artwork, right? Like that's the poetry, I would say, of a sort of ability of, you pretty much, I think most people think that religion is like a Rubik's Cube. You gotta solve it, and when you solve it, you're gonna go to heaven. But in actuality, nature is God's creation. And so when man has faith in the nature of itself, in the nature of the world, right, then it's as if like the point of religion is actually the renunciation of the artificial. This is, I think, in the top line of, where I think the theological, perspective aims. To me, I would not say that I am religious or unreligious to me. I pretty much Mr. Within. If somebody was like, Mr. Within, what do you believe in? I'll be like, I don't believe language can replace truth. And I've realized it's an experience. In this lifetime of mine, I'm pretty much, I have the contentment that I'm this unknown attention looking through my eyes, and I'm seeing a known world landscape, and the style of my soul is revealed in how I go about in every moment being an expression, right? And the idea of memory is pretty much like, what sort of companions or inner archetypes do you want to carry into your future, right? And those people even seeking the idea of Mahasamadhi, it's as if like there's some people wanting to know who they are. There's some people who know they know who they are, but they now realize they want to be beyond that, right? Imagination is like conscious paint, consciousness, or what I have termed in some talks of mine, its beginning being the subjective evolution. Guys, there's gonna come a day, I'm gonna say these talks are all like books, because one day I might turn them all into books. But what it is that in the middle of nowhere, before time could be a watch on our wrist, or before time could be shackled to our wrist, we were an unknown presence of being. This is the origin of imagination and creativity. It is remembering that you're unknown, so in every moment, all the dots of perception can be reconnected in so many different ways, right? For me, it's as if I have realized that at least I can say this for my own mind, but I feel it's universal. For me, there's a geometrical dimension, and there has been so many states. If people were like, Mr. Within, tell us a spiritual experience, I'll tell you there's been moments where I've just been a pure geometrical entity. When I say geometrical entity, no personality, no emotions, no context of, supernatural or anything. It's just as if I felt like I was a shape in the shape of the world, in all its shapes, as if everything I've seen this whole time has been shape, color, space. Everything we have feared has been the potential of shape, color, space, and substance. What I see lacking from civilization 1.0 or modern society, I call it civilization 1.0, but what is lacking is a fascination for how the species still doesn't know. If the future generations think they're stupid, that's another way of saying they don't want to know anymore. Because that's the only stupidity in a world that is so big, who can know it all? Nobody knows it all, right? But we know as far as our effort goes. So pretty much I will tell you, anybody who cultivates what I term endless effort in anything you do, that means you don't measure the effort, you just aim forward, you will realize that it's all about will. It's as if is the free will free? It's like we're calling it free will, now let's see if it's truly free. And in actuality, the object can break or suffer. The object can be dismissed. The ideas come and go, but where the object and subject are being in that space, which is being simultaneously the awareness of our mind of the whole moment. Dear viewers, where we have been moments of being, and the content inside it changes, and we even say, like, we celebrate our different birthdays, or we say, you know, my body, my mind, my soul. It's like, who's that my that is owning the mind, which is creating the idea of the mind, you know? There is hilariously a paradoxical edge, right? In ancient writings, if one was to classify, like, give some sort of classification, the more the text began talking about what is actually going on, the more it would reach a paradoxical nature, because the way you get out of duality is you realize that it is simultaneously both are true. It's as if when you realize that the language that the mind uses to be a character in itself is actually a coin. Literally, like, a good metaphor for the mind is like a coin spinning in the air. You know? We shift. We have been, you know, we accept that reality is cyclical, but we go on with the story that we're this one character in a world. It's like, what about the seasons of the mind? What about our inner realms having different states of function? You know, what if right now, the future, let's say 1,000 years, people in the future are going to look at us and they're going to be like, no way, all of our ancestors had the potential we discovered, but they never tried it, right? Mankind is in some sense the coolest thing that has happened to this cosmos. And, you know, if there are any extraterrestrial or higher dimensional things, they should look at the human being and they should smile, you know. Mankind is going to be the most hilarious advanced civilization in the cosmos. You know, I created this kind of sci-fi story segment to one of my talks where I was like, imagine the human civilization is advanced and we've discovered there's a galactic, you know, like we have the United Nations. Imagine there's a galactic United Nation, United Planets or something. Galactic United Planets, like, and so imagine we go there and it's like this gigantic coliseum with, you know, the you know, ambassadors from each, like, planet or something, and like the team for the human Earth, for human Earth has gone there for the first time, and imagine we're being introduced to the galactic, you know, United Planets, you know, and so let's say it'd be poetically, like, let's say the Andromedans and the Pleiadians, you know, vouch for us and they you know, introduce us, right? And then they're you know, human, and suddenly, like, the microphones pass to, let's say, the human ambassador in the GUP, the Galactic United Planets, okay? And so imagine the human leaders are like, okay, so we're gonna just show the most advanced thing, you know, to all, like, we're giving a gift to, like, the, let's say, council members, and we give cookies, right? Imagine, like, that's the way we kind of, like, befriend the galactic GUP, you know. We pretty much, like, give cookies to all the aliens, you know, cookies and milk, and they get shocked, you know what I mean? They're like, how simple, how magnificent, you know. Pretty much that was it, you know, that was the segment I shared in one talk, you know. Giving cookies and milk to aliens. We're like, it worked on Santa, this shit should work for aliens too, you know. God, I am, you know, sometimes my silliness fascinates me as well, guys. It's not just the video. But anyways, to go on with this, the idea is, the point I'm trying to make is from a real object, physical place, we're going to a sort of unreal, non-physical state. Okay? And this is happening in a time span of, give it like, I don't know, 4,000, 5,000 years. Right? It's pretty much how manifestation moves on. Right? It's just like we have a person in ancient mystical thought where the person attains Mahasamadhi, or they transcend this dimension, or to the modern programmer it would be like they escape the simulation. It would be like now the species is going to transcend itself, and the transcendence of a species is into a realization that even before we built the most advanced cyberspace technologies of let's say mental integration, we have been the space of our world, and that is when fear, the concept of it eradicates. It doesn't make sense anymore. If we have been the space, if the mind has never been an object, what has feared death? What is death? Right? It's as if we shift our certainty of the events in nature we have classified into let's say 10% or 20% uncertainty. We change its opacity, or we fade it out, and we begin to wonder again, and then new systems are built. Pretty much the idea is that they don't say this, but mastery is repetition. Anybody who's good at anything, they've had, their mind holds many memories of it. There's this Guru Padmasambhava quote. Let me find this. Guru Padmasambhava says, if you want to know your past life, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future life, look at your present actions. And so, the implication of this quote, guys, is simply like, I'll use myself as an example, as I said earlier. It would be as if, technically I am creating in my future life pretty much like a communication algorithm. Right? So I don't know if there is another life. I might, let's say, find myself, on another planet where a species is about to advance. Who knows? To be honest, poetically, in my poetry, I've acknowledged it like this, where I feel like the algorithm of my soul is like it arises when, there's, how can I tell you, when an advanced civilization is ready to sprout. Because this is the finale, right? We don't even consider it. We think we have to be anarchy, or it has to be an anarchy, or we have to just be just live like the birds and squirrels in a sort of, peace that never evolved into anything. The idea is that the mind is here to give us access to novelty. Novelty means that the future is waiting. What the future is waiting for is, in some sense, the greatest performance of the present. So to me, I have this mentality where if Guru Padmasambhava, this enlightened Tibetan Buddhic figure, or Bodhisattva, and he says in some sense, okay, so you want to know your past life, look at where you are in the present, and if you want to know your future life, look at what you're doing in the present. And so I have this strategy where if in every moment of my life I uphold the advanced archetype, that means, imagine that, to me, I would say God equals advancement. It's like the prime mover of the realm, if there is, right? We give it shape and name and a face and a personality. It's like we personify the unknown cosmic intelligence, but it's still unknown cosmic intelligence. The idea that God is inconceivable is another way of saying the truth is too big. And so playfully we march on into the void, It's as if, even if there was an extinction scenario, the species should be, in some sense, not in a state of fear. There's no point to fear. I've realized this, that fear was not the point of existence. And consciousness holds within it an infinite victory. That is the point of life. You know, we get to see how great it was, or it is, or it will be. You know, the idea is that if we can be free, so will the future. But if we as a human species feel we are not free, people are still trying to get enlightened, it's as if, what if the world was? It's like the person's like, I don't need to get enlightened because the world is enlightened, so technically everything that's a part of this world is enlightened. Nature was never ignorant of how it was being. Nature. It's as if to the religious mind, it's as if the religious person's like, God, why aren't you answering my prayers? And it's as if, in some sense, the realization comes that God's always been there, right? That's the brilliance of it, right? It's pretty much we are present in the light of a greater mind, right? And I believe this is something I feel. I even feel that life is invisible. Like, that's the point, you know, the real is what we're considering visible and tangible. So pretty much it's an evolution of a visible object into an invisible subject into an inconceivable being. And I'm like, okay, what do I tell people about spirituality? It's like, it's going to the inconceivable, right? And the inconceivable is nothing to fear, because who fears a portal of a one-way street, you know? At the end of a one-way street, it's as if it's like that is the only place to go. You see, the unknown is really beautiful. And when something is beautiful, you cannot fear it. And eventually a sort of love blooms where you're like, I have loved myself, I have loved my friends and family, you know. But wait a minute, it's like, imagine the person's like, I've loved my grandchildren, but wait a minute. Have I loved the species? I feel this is the great, you know, bypass of existential suffering against the void. An advanced civilization is the greatest performance of a species. And imagine right now, tomorrow, everybody opened their eyes and they were their most advanced self, their most advanced state of being the moment, right? Even whether it's ideological or not, you would feel no fear in any boundary. Imagine a species that expanded the horizons of its skill, and so the future would not be filled with good or bad people, but it would be filled, you know, with, I would say, efficient, skilled visionaries. That's it. I was like, okay, there's no point of being a visionary. right? If the it's like when the world is so big, it's as if we need everybody we can get. It's as if like believe it or not, maybe in the future, thousands of years after I'm gone and these talks still echo in cyberspace, maybe there will come a time when technology is connected to animals, like lesser species, right? And they will hear these talks, like, or even androids or robots and shit, So I don't know, maybe I'll say it, if you're in, let's say, technologically updated animal or a pure robotic entity or an extraterrestrial, who may be hearing this lecture in the future. Let's see how far the advanced civilization can go. Let's see this glow of 8 billion candles. It's as if what bright, flame of the future it will illuminate in the darkness of the cosmos, like some, how would I say it, in ancient times they would give a metaphor that it's like the sun was a lantern, like they didn't have the word sun, and they're like, what's that in the sky? It's the lantern in the sky. You know what I mean? It's like, who's holding that lantern? Stop asking questions. It's like that was like probably the vibe back in the day. But it's like as if who holds this lantern that is the human species. There's a reason energy is taking shape in this way. Like it's more than our inner satisfaction of an individual. It feels to me like something, like it's as if we are all waiting for the great collective event to take place. But the point is we're waiting for ourselves, because who else can bring it? Right? Either aliens land or angels descend, or I don't know, future selves arrive, or it's us. And so we are like, the paintbrush in the empty canvas of space. And the idea is that, the person thought they're an artist. Life is in some sense an artwork where forces in nature are bringing manifestation in the visible range of the human perception. It's as if like it's being painted by all of itself. And that's the magnificence. It's like the world is the greatest artwork. There's no greater masterpieces. So those who in some sense are content with the world, it's like mastery is primordial. So to the questions, is imagination paint on the empty canvas of space? I mean, of course, or how else would meaning exist? And so the second question, could imagination be our life inside another dimension? I feel this one's yes and no. No if you're a materialist, yes if you're an immaterialist. Or we bring in like mind-body dualism. But the whole point is there is an inner life, because if somebody says what is moving the body, right, it is their idea of self that is functioning within them. So in some sense, we are being a mental effort before we're being a physical effort, a psychological effort before we're being a physiological effort, to ourself at least. The body's existing, of course, before consciousness dances, but I'm saying, like, to the conscious viewer, it's like they are the starting point. Existence is like how we're being a universal event. Experience is how we're being an individual name with a name. Right? That shit is like, it's like, man, I'm bringing name tag in the cosmos. Who am I working for here? Do you know? Like, it's like, it's like, oh my god, the viewers are gonna be like, Mr.Within is employed by the whole universal consciousness. But honestly, it's all playfulness, I'm telling you.
what can you do with the bizarre? Like at first you freak out, but then you're like, okay, it's still here. You know, we're still existing in the middle of nowhere, you know, and we've just, like, with honestly what it is, like, it's like a bunch of creatures on a rock. They started making noise, and then they started believing that their noise was more important than what this is, right? And it's another way of saying we didn't just name ourselves, we named everything we could see, so we could have a sort of subjective navigation in consciousness experiencing itself as a storyteller, you know. Poetically, you know, the heart of hearts is how we are the storytellers of our own soul. And what karma is how you held the world based on how the world held you. To me, I am like, I don't know, like the part of me feels like maybe I have served the realm, like people, you know, usually people in their past life, they you know, let's say if an egotistical person thinks about their past life, they're like, buddy, I was a king, obviously, you know. But, you know, maybe there's some people who feel that in their past lives they have been the servants of greatness. What that means is that is the greatest thing. What greatness does is, in some sense, awaken all of itself. And so once your individual, or the person's liberated from their individual life, their collective life begins. And if they're liberated beyond their collective life, their inconceivable life begins. But that inconceivable life is the unknown moving first. So it's as if, let's say, you know, a bunch of multidimensional beings were like, okay, a human being went on Earth, right? So it's like, and that the human being evolved into a collective being, into some, let's say, higher consciousness. And imagine now there was another version of a human being, let's say that what the old soul was doing was in some sense being timeless in time. The young soul is trying to find time in the timeless, or try to make a fragment of how the moment happens to be truth. It's like the wisdom, I would say, of the mystic is that you don't touch truth. This is the honor of it, right? And when I say you don't touch truth, I don't mean you don't touch truth of language. Language is just, you know, how shapes become worlds behind your eyes. But I'm saying in some sense, like, it's how much you trust the unknown force of your life, and how unknown dimensions of your life, and how much you trust the known dimensions. I have literally played around with the known dimensions of my life to such a degree where the fascination of my moment is like, okay, what are the limits of this entity? You know, or as Shri Nisargadatta Maharaj, this enlightened yogi, has such an epic quote, and it's so short. The quote is, "Are you an entity?" Question mark. As if, are we? Or is there something here that can never not be? One of the most remarkable things I heard from Alan Watts, the great Alan Watts, who in some sense people think he had a bad ending, he had a tragic ending, but he didn't. He was so smart that he wanted to detach people from himself, from his idea of himself. But people who knows how their life moves, you know, there's to me it has reached a point where I'm like, okay, it's a blessing to be present in existence is an instantaneous blessing, you know. And so who is it a blessing of, or what is the blessing for? And this is the point of life. It's a line we must draw ourselves. And who knows, you know, I think the thing about being conditioned, let's say in a religious culture, there's something where it's as if, for how long are we going to be inferior to the unknown? That's the issue.
To be superior to the unknown means consciousness is like, all right, I'm here, I might as well implement a strategy to see, in some sense, how the projections of the moment, become doors that can open or not. And believe it or not, nobody is language. Language is an additional thing. It's like, imagine somebody put a sticker on your forehead and there was a name on that sticker and you thought that sticker was you. It's like, how ridiculous. The idea is that we're realizing as a species that the human being is actually present in an unknown multidimensional way, and the most efficient thing we can do is have a presumption of unity. So what it is that people are like, man, I want the world to change. When's it gonna change? And it changes when we are in our minds living in a better world. That's it. What else can we do? We were in the jungle and we imagined civilization, and now we're inside civilization. Guess what? We had a civilization. It's like we're gonna step out of the concrete jungle. We're going to arrive at a point where the human being has a multidimensional magnificence to it. That means every person, let's say whoever you are listening to this, every person you have ever seen, they have not just been what you've seen, what you have seen. And just like an object can be looked at through different angles, a subject can be looked at different angles, and mysticism is the realization of the space where it's happening. So anybody who wants to, it's like there is no attaining enlightenment, there is no attaining samadhi, you just realize you're already in it, you're being it. Because being needs no reason, reason emerges from being. So when one is content with the simplicity of how unknown they're being, then they have a sort of very incredible accuracy to how knowledge is moving in the moment. Because really what it is something's moving here. Am I the only one fascinated by this? Are the sufferings of life, worth ignoring this? To be honest, if we truly love our species, we will care for its greatness. That's how it goes. That's what really, in my view, I think that's what life, what love is. Love is when you realize that which you love deserves as much as, deserves not just the infinity use, but the infinity beyond, your mind. There's so many archetypes, it's like on some level there's been so many different types of human beings where the human beings okay, we're each our own strategy. And the idea is that the species no longer needs to walk alone because it's a species, it's like we look like each other, like Fiddler just as a biological organism, we look like each other. And that's enough to, in some sense, the ego of 8 billion creatures to enlist in the greatest project known to the world, It's like may the songs of the advanced civilization be heard. And it will, I don't know if I feel like maybe in 10 years we'll start to see everybody talking about the importance of the advancement of civilization, because it's an incredible counterattack to the meaningless of the void. It's like we are performers of, it's like knowledge is the performance in the unknown. And imagination, guys, I guess my current attitude to it is that it's a technology. When I wake up, the moment can be simple, or the moment can be very complex, And I've realized that this is the power of choice, because people don't understand the responsibility that comes with true freedom. True freedom means you're free to do anything And when you're free as a multidimensional being, I'm talking in a mystical context, when you have that freedom, then whose responsibility is manifestation? Freedom is another way of saying you're becoming responsible for the whole cosmos. This is why they say George Orwell got it right when he said ignorance is bliss. It's the bliss of being irresponsible for the whole universe as a universal being. The ignorance of it means there's less to do, but a part of your mind is going to be like, what if there's more to see? You see, that's the thing about belief. A person who can believe in, let's say, a person, okay, let's grant it that a person believes in something, right? But when they wake up tomorrow, they have become someone different. So their belief has to be reestablished, relinked, which I think is the point of prayer, right? Or in some sense, perhaps to be what we are is the most divine thing of all, There's so many ways to look at life where the person's looking at an infinite all-you-can-eat buffet of perception, based on the hunger of your mind, and you're like, okay, what do I do with infinity? Philosophers are still thinking about the finite. We should still start thinking about what would the psychology of immortal beings be like? What would the psychology of immortal beings be like? No, there was another word I meant to say. Just the psychology going towards the notion of a collective being eternity. You see, rather than being limited by language, I think truth releases. For truth is like, the world is allowed to be a free place. But when I say a free place, not culturally, I mean, when the world is beautiful, it's like it does not lack freedom. It's kind of like we have no choice but to be in love with the world before the curtains are pulled, That's where the greatest performance comes from, There's another quote from Guru Padmasambhava. He says, "Are you oblivious to the sufferings of birth, old age, sickness, and death? There is no guarantee that you will survive even past this very day." Okay, that's intense. But Guru Padmasambhava, I'm going to read a few more of his quotes so people get a good sense of who is this guy. Oh, okay, there's more to it, guys. There's more to that quote. He says, "Are you oblivious to the sufferings of birth, old age, sickness, and death? There is no guarantee that you will survive even past this very day. The time has come for you to develop perseverance in your practice, for at this singular opportunity you could attain the everlasting bliss of nirvana. So now is certainly not the time to sit idly, but starting with the reflection on death, you should bring your practice to completion. The moments of our life are not expendable, and the possible circumstances of death are beyond imagination. If you do not achieve an undaunted, confident security now, what point is there in you being alive or living creature?" Yeah, he's pretty much saying, like, you've opened your eyes in an unknown world, just realize death means that we're here for a limited time. And so it's as if base your great performance of manifestation on that. Which he's saying, live by trying to come into a realization of what is this, right? Because that seems to be the greatest thing we can do. Not to just understand that which is outside of us, but to understand the whole picture, right? To reach a point where, a universal being doesn't fear itself, into temporary manifestation. Guru Padmasambhava says, abandon your notions of the past without attributing a temporal sequence. Cut off your mental associations regarding the future without anticipation. Rest in a spacious modality without clinging to the thoughts of the present. Do not meditate at all, since there's nothing upon which to meditate. Instead, revelation will come through undistracted mindfulness, since there's nothing by which you can be distracted. Again, he said, like, this is a pointer that if you focus on your known personality, suffering seems to be the consequence. But if you focus on your unknown presence, bliss seems to be the consequence. But not the bliss of ignorance. It's in some sense, it's as if, like, if you identify with a known if you identify with a known personality, it's like there's a defeat in that. But if you identify as an unknown presence, there's a, victory in that. A timeless victory, and in the other sense, a sort of time-bound defeat. Guru Padmasambhava says you don't have to be a philosopher, you just have to want to know who you are. Yeah, that's pretty much all that we could do. Guru Padmasambhava says, if upon looking outwards towards the eternal expanse of the sky, there are no projections emanated by the mind, and if on looking inwards at one's own mind, there is no projectionist who projects thoughts by thinking them, then one's own mind, completely free from conceptual projections, will become luminously clear. What an incredible quote. I guess this was the description. The quote for the description. After we've understood it, the only thing left to do is love the world. It's pretty much, it's like the intellect enters its paradise, and then the heart, it's like the brain gets the job done, and then the heart's journey is left. And hopefully, the person is blessed to have their heart embrace them. Sometimes a person can become such an intellectual entity that subconsciously they don't believe in the emotions anymore. And when they don't believe in emotions, they feel like that's when the heart is, in some sense, becomes barricaded, right? And the only way that heart can, I would say poetically, how that can break is that, in some sense, the unknown can do it. It's another way of saying, like, some moments you got to do something for something to happen, but in some other moments you have to wait. And when I say you have to wait, it's another way of saying, like, if you deserve it, it happens, pretty much. If you deserve it, it happens. And if a part of you thinks it doesn't deserve the love beyond the intellect, then the intellect or the ego counts its tears in the anguish of an infinite manifestation. Because what love is the closest thing to the unknown's relationship with the known, right? That means it's like love has no explanation. It's poetically, I could say, unknown variables moving the moment. It's like something where the heart's breathing can be heard before, the mind's whispers. It's kind of cool. We're just being here in existence. It's like existence is chilling. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening, and there's this quote I'm going to read. It's from Robert Adams. I don't know much about this person. And what I know, I don't know if it's this guy or somebody else, but anyways, he says sadhana, which is a Vedic word for spiritual practices. Sadhana, spiritual practices do not wake you up by themselves. They have no awakening powers, but they put your mind to rest, and when your mind is at rest, you awaken. That means when you can trust life, it will happen. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. Or another way of saying it. And who knows, the personality is hilariously like a chemical that is reacting to every new experience. It's like a chemical reaction, but novelty is more chemical, and the past is more chemical. Let's say the present is a chemical. It's like a chemist is going to be like, oh my god. Something I wish I could have told my chemistry teacher, There was a specific one. I wish I could go to him and say, hey sir, what if the periodic table is alive? What if each cell is alive and each element has a consciousness, And the teacher would be like, get out of here, kid. It's like we're trying to climb a question mark that goes beyond the atmosphere to the edge of the cosmos. Probably in the future, some gazillionaire is gonna have like an interstellar city shaped like a question mark. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening. I hope this episode was helpful. Much blessings amongst.